Secrets no more. Quote, the money powers prey upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. The banking powers are more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than any bureaucracy. They denounce as public enemies all who question their methods or throw light upon their crimes. Quote, President Abraham Lincoln. If indeed we do live in a fair and open democracy, the public most certainly does deserve to have freedom of information. It can be argued that keeping a secret is a form of lying. Maybe this is even the worst form of lying, especially when withholding certain information can cause harm to others. What is not said can speak volumes. There are people who risk their lives to end the age of secrecy endemic in the United States and around the world. Secrecy is both expensive and can have negative consequences. As former Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote in his 1998 book, appropriately titled Secrecy, quote, the actors involved seem hardly to know the set of rules they play. Most important, they seem never to know the damage that they can do, end quote. Regarding the UFO subject and its dismissal by skeptics, he continued, quote, conspiracy theories have been a part of American culture for 2 centuries, but they seem to have grown in dimension and public acceptance in recent decades, end quote. If the intelligence community and the highest ranking officials in this country don't fully understand the game and its consequences they play, how can the general public comprehend the scale and scope of the big secrets in America? The UFO cover-up is simply symptomatic of far larger secrecy problems. This audiobook holds credible evidence that the UFO phenomenon is not a conspiracy, not a false set of beliefs. However, perhaps because it is a real phenomenon and such a bombshell, there is a conspiracy of secrecy to prevent disclosure. Hence, the dedication to Secrets No More. At a strategic level, the practice of over-classification, that is, over-classified in the sense of keeping unnecessary secrets or spreading outright lies, erodes the public's trust and confidence in their government. We all know by judging from the events in the recent past that there are many instances in which officials of the government have been less than truthful. Recent polls have shown that over half of the American people feel they cannot trust the government. Secrecy, which is rarely justified, contrary to official claims, greatly contributes to this declining trust. Also, unfortunately, the manner in which the UFO topic has been handled has increased the level of distrust for the general public, and to a much greater degree for those true believers. Secrecy is repugnant. In late April of 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a revealing speech before the American Newspaper Publishers Association about the danger of the powerful elite keeping secrets. He made clear that secret societies were operating among us and wielded enormous control. He called these groups a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. Kennedy went on to say in his address, quote, The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is a very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it is in my control, and no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. End quote. A conspiracy, by definition, implies that a group of people performs a treacherous or evil act and attempt to do so in secret. Napoleon said that history is the lie agreed upon. Indeed, the winner of a conflict gets to rewrite the history. It makes victims of everyone, not in on the conspiracy. The more insidious the conspiracy, the less likely the victims know that they are being victimized. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels famously stated, quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." End quote. A grand conspiracy must be identified in the esoteric narrative as twofold, both as the effort to suppress the truth and keeping that suppression shrouded in secrecy maintained by the state. The key to maintaining a massive secret agenda is a classic pyramid structure, a need-to-know system where people only understand as much as they need to in order to accomplish their tasks, but no more. That way, only the individuals at the top of each pyramid can ever access the full plan. Secret societies and the aerospace military complex work this way, including the CIA, the banks, the major corporations, the military, mainstream media, and religious hierarchies. An open source, democratic intelligence agency. Today we have the whistleblower website WikiLeaks offering a look behind the government's curtain. Not since Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers in 1971 has there been a more effective challenge to state secrecy. In a modern version of the Pentagon Papers story, Army soldier Bradley Manning, goes by the name Chelsea Manning, was arrested in Iraq in May 2010 on suspicion of having passed restricted material to the website WikiLeaks. Chelsea Manning started leaking classified information to WikiLeaks in 2010 as a way to protest the conduct of the war in Iraq. She downloaded data onto a CD marked Lady Gaga, lip-syncing as she supposedly did her job. She posted her reasons for releasing classified information on a blog site. Quote, hypothetical question. If you had free reign over classified networks for long periods of time, say 8 to 9 months, and you saw incredible things, awful things, things that belonged in the public domain and not on some server stored in a dark room in Washington, D.C., what would you do? End quote. Bradley Manning, who now identifies as Chelsea, was convicted in 2013 of aiding the enemy, a violation of the Espionage Act. She's currently serving a 35-year sentence, which was ended at the end of Obama's term with a pardon. And now Chelsea Manning is free. WikiLeaks was set up in late 2006 as a disclosure portal, initially using the Wikipedia model, where volunteers would write up and analyze classified or restricted material submitted by whistleblowers, or material that was in some other way legally threatened. The de facto editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks is Julian Assange, an Australian with a background in computer hacking. It was he who had the idea of creating what he saw as an open source, democratic intelligence agency. A challenge to the ultimate secret. People wishing to encourage an open source, democratic intelligence agency have identified many black programs. The black programs are so named because it is very difficult to shine a light on their activities and expose the corruption within. There can be governments within governments within governments, and the black ones, or secret governments, can be invisible to the elected government itself. Since 2012, Julian Assange remains in London's Ecuador embassy under political asylum. He faces rape charges in Sweden, but most think it is really because WikiLeaks released a section of more than 250,000 classified U.S. diplomatic cables passed to the whistleblowing website by Chelsea Manning and others. U.S. officials and other world politicians have denounced Assange as a traitor, and some have even publicly called for his assassination. But Mr. Assange says he has a smoking gun, a secret that keeps his would-be executioners at bay. This secret will be released in time, or in the event he is killed or extradited to the United States. According to Julian Assange, quote, it is worth noting that in yet-to-be-published parts of the Cablegate archive, there are indeed references to UFOs, end quote. These references to extraterrestrial life in yet-to-be-published confidential files were obtained from the U.S. government. Perhaps in response to Julian Assange's claim to have possession of official U.S. diplomatic cables regarding UFOs, both the FBI and the NSA online sites have started posting UFO-related materials on their websites. Also likely in response to the WikiLeaks announcement, the British government has released the largest number of UFO files of any government to date. Over 8,500 new pages were released in June 2011 by the National Archives. And in yet another strange twist, The respected Guardian newspaper ran the headline, "Earth must prepare for close encounters with aliens, say scientists." Debunkers no more. Those who have debunked UFOs for the last 70-plus years are becoming a dying breed, since the National Security Agency, the NSA, released many declassified documents pertaining to UFOs starting in April 2011. Those who have made a career proclaiming the entire UFO phenomenon is just plain nonsense, mass hallucinations, swamp gas, or earthly aircraft, were either terribly uninformed or outright liars. Most damning to debunkers is a document pertaining to US and Soviet scientists decoding messages from a higher intelligence at the time Sputnik was launched in the early 1960s. This single document on the NSA website proves the debunkers are, and always have been, dead wrong. In April 2011, the Allen Telescope Array, or ATA, at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, SETI, was temporarily mothballed. At a time when NASA's Hubble, Kepler, and other exoplanet hunting telescopes are detecting hundreds of confirmed and candidate alien worlds orbiting other stars, wouldn't this be an opportunity to point the ATA at some of these worlds, particularly the ones known to have Earth-like characteristics? There seems to be reluctance to study similarly habitable exoplanets. Even more curious is the timing of SETI's radio telescope arrays shutting down abruptly with little notice, quote, due to budget cutbacks. SETI announced they would turn off their signals on April 15, 2011, only a week before the NSA released documents confirming human contact with extraterrestrials. For UFO researchers, this is a small vindication that their studies were valid all along. Unfortunately for these long-ridiculed researchers, an official disclosure may not be forthcoming. Contrary to the widespread debunker opinion regarding the U.S. government's supposed inability to keep anything secret, quite the opposite is true. In August 1942, the Manhattan Project was tasked to develop the atomic bomb. It was started under the control of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during the Roosevelt administration, and not a single leak occurred among the 125,000 people assigned to work on the project. The Manhattan Project utilized 4 main facilities, including Hanford, Washington, the Clinton Engineering Works at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the basement of an unused football stadium at the University of Chicago, Illinois, and the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which was built in 1943 on a secluded New Mexico mesa and headed by Robert Oppenheimer. It was, and still is, possible to keep most classified developments top secret. Core secrets. A core secret is considered so sensitive by the U.S. intelligence community that not only its contents, but its very existence is a secret. Within NATO, the UFO phenomenon is classified as cosmic top secret, which is an ever higher secret ranking than plans for the hydrogen bomb. As such, the extraterrestrial presence is the core story in this uppermost level of U.S. intelligence secrecy. Some researchers speculate the U.S. military brass will not, indeed cannot, ever make an official ET disclosure because of these above top secret classifications. Within the U.S. government, there are various levels of special access programs, SAPs. The first being a division into acknowledged and unacknowledged SAPs. A black program is slang for an unacknowledged SAP. An unacknowledged SAP is so sensitive that its very existence is a core secret. Indeed, some unacknowledged SAPs are sensitive to the extent that they are waived from the normal management and oversight protocols. Even members of Congress in the Appropriations Committee are not allowed to know anything about these programs, along with the Senate and House committees that allocate budgets and the intelligence committees. In the case of a waived SAP, only 8 members of Congress, the chairs and ranking minority members of the 4 defense committees, are even notified that a given program has been waived. Even when these programs are waived, committee members are not told anything about the nature of the program. In this case, such a program is certainly deep black. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, who was the 6th man to walk on the moon, remains an outspoken believer that the government harbors core story secrets. Mitchell has revealed why the UFO subject is a core secret, even out of reach of the president or anyone in government, including Congress, who are all regarded as only on a need-to-know basis. Mitchell, who landed on the moon with Alan B. Shepard in February 1971, stated flatly, quote, "A few insiders know the truth and are studying the bodies that have been discovered," end quote. Then he added, "A cabal of insiders stopped fully briefing presidents about extraterrestrial matters after President Kennedy." NASA astronaut Gordon Cooper also has expressed his frustration with core secrets. Quote, "For many years I have lived with a secret, in a secrecy imposed on an all specialist in astronautics. I can now reveal that every day in the USA, our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quality of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means," end quote. Astronaut Mitchell had a conversation with a high-ranking admiral within the Joint Chiefs who agreed to investigate the core story of alien contact and report back. The admiral, who has been identified as Rear Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, did provide Mitchell with the confirmation that his assessment was essentially correct. Quoting an article taken from the prestigious Jane's Defense Weekly, Mitchell implied that the admiral had discovered that the core story was protected by a special access program. As reported by Jane's, such a black program must remain unacknowledged when it is, quote, "considered so sensitive that the fact of its existence is a core secret, which can be defined as any item, progress, strategy, or element of information, the compromise of which would result in unrecoverable failure," end quote. Astronaut Mitchell then added, quote, The UFO program that the admiral sought would be in this category. Thus, by law, he would be required to deny the existence of such a program. For a core secret special access program, even a no comment would be a breach of secrecy, end quote. So if our top elected officials cannot make UFO inquiries, nor can the highest ranking military officials or the highly esteemed Apollo astronauts, then who is really in charge? Secret justifications. The powers that be strongly believe in the value and legitimacy of using secrecy over the people. They justify their actions because those uninformed or those not sure what to believe are scared, and any disclosure would cause panic. What if people took their own lives because of fear of something coming and then nothing happened? They cite the 1938 Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast when a panic broke out because the show sounded like a real hostile alien invasion. Such a news quarantine on anything UFO related can be traced back to the World War II era. While returning to Britain from a mission in Germany, aircrew personnel were reportedly approached by a metallic UFO on the English coast. The crew took photographs, reported that the UFO appeared to hover noiselessly, and then the craft suddenly disappeared. Upon hearing the story, Winston Churchill ordered the report to be kept secret for 50 years or more. Quote, "This event should be immediately classified since it would create mass panic amongst the general population and destroy one's faith in the church," end quote, said Churchill. Looked at another way, what if something really bad was going to happen, such as the catastrophic impact of a meteor? Would you really want to know? Would it be better for the disaster to be over quickly with little or no warning, or for people to be in terror for months or years before impact? Maybe those pulling the strings behind the scenes justify their actions of secrecy to world politicians by saying chaos and fear would be much worse. They ask leaders, how could they possibly manage to control a mass panic before a coming disaster? Would they want their constituents to live in fear? No, they would keep the secret. The extremely wealthy elite, let's call them the cabal, hold the lion's share of vital secrets. Many of these secrets, such as free energy or anti-gravity technology, would greatly benefit humanity. Unfortunately, the cabal has incredible disdain for the vast majority of people. They regard the mass public as, quote, worthless eaters, end quote. There are also reports of their dastardly future eugenics plan to reduce the world's population by upwards of 90%. They believe that there are far too many people alive, especially too many inferior brown-type people, and they have publicly stated their opinions on the Georgia Guidestones. Such plans to create chaos, destruction, and mass murder need to be kept out of the public view at all costs. If you are a researcher and you get too close to exposing the cabal, your life is in great danger. They use assassinations like most people go through tissue papers. We are dealing with some very dangerous, ruthless, and controlling sociopathic individuals. No wonder they see a need for absolute secrecy, and no wonder many Americans see a need for disclosure. Ultra high net worth. When one class of people loses its wealth, another group deposits the wealth into its portfolio. When whole communities are affected by foreclosures, the wealth shifts upward where shrewd investors stand to gain. The rich continue to get richer as the numbers indicate. The number of individuals with at least 1 million in investable assets rose 8.3% to 10.9 million investors after markets rebounded following the 2008 financial crisis. The wealth of global millionaires increased to 42.7 trillion in 2010, up from 40.7 trillion in 2007. Most telling are the global ranks of ultra high net worth individuals, defined as those with 30 million of investable assets instead of only 1 million for regular millionaires. And this group increased at a faster pace than the millionaires, rising 10%. The richest 1% of Americans possesses more wealth than the accumulated wealth of the lower 90% combined. It doesn't get much better globally, where the richest 2% of adults currently own more than half the world's wealth. In these intentionally orchestrated times of recession and depression, the 1% are thriving with record profits. The extreme concentration of wealth within a tiny percent of individuals is usually the tipping point before an economic collapse, unless you're the one gaming the system. Before the crash in 1929 that led to the Great Depression, elite bankers pulled their money out of the stock market. After the crash, they used that money to buy up cheap stocks and smaller failing banks for pennies on the dollar. The next stage after accumulating money is to seize power. The people who have established the Federal Reserve are beginning to create exclusive societies for themselves simply to retain and create yet more control. In 2006, while still in office, President George W. Bush had purchased a 98,842 acre farm in northern Paraguay, protected by a semi-secret U.S. military base. The Mariscal Estragalabria sprawling airbase complex and the Bush Ranch in Paraguay are both located atop one of the world's largest freshwater aquifers. Does Bush foresee a collapse of the U.S. economy or world economy, or a time when he might need to flee an arrest warrant and feels his family could use an escape plan? Or are they better off staying here, scamming the system for as long as possible, and if they do get in trouble, persuade the right people for a bailout? The system is no longer beholden to the people. If it were, there would be no such thing as too big to fail. The majority of Americans were against bailing out the banks in 2008. According to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, "The top 6 financial institutions in this country own assets equal to or more than 60% of our gross domestic product and possess enormous economic and political power," end quote. Sanders bravely asks a question few of his colleagues will support. Quote, "One of the great questions of our time is whether the American people, through Congress, will control the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior on Wall Street. or whether Wall Street will continue to wreak havoc on our economy and the lives of working families." End quote. The highly concentrated influence of the Rockefeller cabal remains a huge threat to American interests, as JFK warned in his "Secrecy is Repugnant" speech. Secret power brokers such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers are examples. Some, if not all, of the highest-ranking politicians must go through these organizations first before they become government candidates. In this arrangement, politicians who must rely on large sums of money to further fuel their campaigns are then heavily influenced. At the international level, central bankers use the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to make more money while exploiting the resources of the countries they lend to, sometimes bankrupting them in the process. The bankers covertly encourage war because the government would need to borrow money from them and then pay it back with interest. It is a vicious cycle, and with the ultra-rich ultimately calling the shots, they are always on top. Occupy the world. The explosive growth of the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations that began in mid-September 2011 and spread to other cities across America and then globally within weeks illustrates the growing awareness and deep discontent of people worldwide. The banking cartel, under any different name, will do nothing to change the status quo, and nothing ever will change under their power. They're happy to create credit out of thin air, charge interest, which is never credited, and control people and politicians alike. There is not enough money on credit and principal to ever pay it all back. The whole money system, from the time it was created, was designed for human suppression and control. When 99% of the Occupy movement expressed outrage about the bondage of corporate banking, it struck a chord with a wide audience. Their demand should be no less than an end to private banks, their ability to control credit, and governments having to borrow from private banks at interest. As a leaderless consensus movement in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street and the worldwide occupation movement, the 99% organized and articulated a simple message: we will no longer tolerate the 1% wielding the power they gained with a promise to serve in our best interests, but instead are only serving only themselves. How can we break the bonds of mental emancipation we now find ourselves under and the illegal truth embargo they impose? People have been trained to believe that which they are told, whether it is truth or a lie, to the point where we are simply victims of the lies. But are we? They are the few and we are the many. If we stay divided, they win. If we all become aware together, even just 10% of the world's population, then they can no longer keep their vice grip on power. If we fall back into fear or into perpetual conflict amongst ourselves, then they will win. They use all the dirty tricks. The controllers know the initial stage of any war is fought in the public arena. If they can successfully influence mass opinion to get behind a cause, then they might not need to manipulate any further. Great invasions do not happen with thundering smoke and high-tech weaponry. That is the mark of an immature society. Great invasions happen in secrecy. In The Art of War, a classic 5th century treatise of Chinese philosopher and battle strategist General Sun Tzu said, quote, "All warfare is based on deception." The master strategist added, quote, "For to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the acme of skill. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill," end quote. The latest platform for molding public opinion has now moved to cyberspace. The recently surfaced Internet Water Army is a group of individuals who act as paid mercenaries to inundate the internet with comments, gossip, or other content to build up or demolish credibility of articles, information, websites, or public figures. These paid staffers pose as ordinary people writing comments on blogs and discussion forums that can demolish the consumer ranking of products and services, create false images, or provide the rationale for opposing perceptions to destroy the truth. Some blame China as the pioneer of the Internet Water Army. China may have started the ominous trend, but the list of abusers is vast. India Daily posted an article that clearly asserts that China is not the only group flooding the internet this way, watering down content or launching cyber attacks. Scams and slanders are commonplace on the freewheeling World Wide Web, no matter your access point. Two scientists at the Canadian University of Victoria investigated the problem of the paid armies of fake commentators in China. They created software that was 85% successful at discovering their identities. Although most of the Water Army soldiers reside in the emerging economies of China and India, almost all of their clients come from the Western Hemisphere. The corporations are employing them. The unions are employing them. And even the political parties employ them for smear campaigns. It is harder than ever now to discern the truth, especially going up against the very well-financed movers and shakers.